Hi everyone, my name's Charlotte. I'm from VICTA. I'm a parent services lead and their in-house sleep practitioner. I'm here today to introduce the first episode of the VICTA Parent Network Voice, the parent-specific podcast. We're going to be running this project throughout 2026 and covering a variety of topics. So the first one is just an introduction, really. We're going to be talking about why we've decided to do a podcast, who I am and why I'm involved in parent services for VICTA. You know, connecting with parents myself has been beneficial not only to my life and my daughter's life. I am the parent to a 15-year-old visually impaired girl that has a condition called optic nerve hypoplasia, which ultimately affects the length and the amount of her optic nerves, the wiring between the eye and the brain. As a result, even though the eye works and functions, the messages from the eye aren't sent to the brain. Scarlett is one of the very rare children with sight loss who has no useful vision. I think there's between 8 and 20%. I'm just plucking figures out of the air, but it's around 20% of all visually impaired people have no useful vision at all. So she doesn't have any light perception. Scarlett came along full term. She was a little bit small, but no one was particularly concerned about that at the time. So I was induced full term and she came out very quickly. She was a little bit little. So due to that, she spent a little bit of time in the ICU just to help her gain some weight. But yeah, apart from that, I just thought I was taking home a perfect little baby girl. And she is still a perfect little baby girl. But her sight issues didn't become apparent until she was around 4 months old. She wasn't kind of staring at all the bright, sparkly things that you'd expect a baby to do. She wasn't tracking things. She seemed to look around all the time. And I just thought she was super inquisitive. Obviously, now we understand that that's nystagmus. I expect many parents have gone through the same, but they just seem to be looking at everything all at the same time. So at 4 months old, she was diagnosed with that condition. We didn't know it was no sight at that stage. It's quite unusual when you do get these sight diagnoses that you think they'd be able to tell you absolutely everything from the off. And it doesn't work like that. You kind of have to wait for them to get a little bit older, wait for you to be able to communicate what they can and can't see. And when the really little visual tests aren't always very accurate. So we kind of just knew that I had a visually impaired child, what the name of the condition was, and kind of sent home from the hospital and left to dealt with. So Scarlett hit all her milestones. She was very active and was pulling herself up from very early on. And she did start to sing songs. She was obsessed with music, which I figured would be quite usual for a children with a sight impairment. And because she was singing all the time and moving and getting around quite well, her mobility and room mapping was exceptional. I thought, yeah, she's just sight impaired. And that's it. And I was watching all videos on the internet about all these children achieving fabulous things, living independently, going off to university, having brilliant jobs, doctors, lawyers. And I was kind of like, yeah, that's what we're aiming for. As Scarlett got older, it became apparent it was just going to be singing. And it was explained to me that there's two different parts of the brain, one that sings and one that talks, and that there's something going on there which is making this delayed, and whether or not that's a learning disability or autism or some other kind of neurological condition will present itself as Scarlett gets older. So she does talk now, but it's requesting language, so it will never be conversational. Because she sang, a lot of her words now are based around requesting certain songs. So from being able to sing kind of Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star for a long time, she's progressed now into a huge catalogue of hundreds of songs, which has been motivated by the fact that she can use an Alexa now, and she can put on the songs that she wants, when she wants, and she can also tell it to go to the loudest volume quite easily as well, which is a bridge that we have to cross. It has to be as loud as we can. So yeah, the fact that she's so motivated by music kind of has taught her to learn so many words, so many artists, and it can be, it can be the Venga Boys, We Like to Party. Sometimes she asks for Andrea Bocelli's It's Time to Say Goodbye. It really is a very vast wide of interest of music, and that's, she loves festivals, she loves gigs. I think she was 8 weeks old when I took her to her first festival, and this was kind of before I knew that she was visually impaired. She's very motivated by music. It's a very important part of her life. Another huge love of her life is food. So obviously she can name pretty much every food item as well. So we can't have the conversation, but she can tell me that she wants chicken tikka and rice with chips. So the communication is there, but it is requesting, and it's around what hugely motivates Scarlett. Her favourite words or requests are hugs, kisses, as mummy, miss mummy, which obviously still melt my heart to this day, even though she's a very big girl now and not the little baby that she once was. So yeah, this is kind of, that little girl is the reason I'm here chatting today on a podcast, which is something I never thought I would do. I started at VICTA as a parent with an idea. I'd come across an American website called Wonder Baby, which I still champion very much today, and it was run by a parent of a visually impaired child, and we became great friends in the early days when I was accessing information, and I was just kind of desperate to recreate a UK version of that. And so it started off as a blog site, and it was through scarlettseyes.com, and yeah, just wrote stories about what was going on, what was scary, what wasn't scary, what was going well, what Scarlett was achieving, you know, everything from getting her registered to not understanding why she wouldn't use cutlery. I wrote about it, and we grew that website, and it became a platform then, and parents were popping up saying, well, I'd like to write a story like that. So it became a publishing platform just for parents, for young visually impaired people, and parents used to like to read about like kind of what older versions of their children thought about. We also moved on to organisations, charities, videos. So yeah, so through Scarlett's Eyes over the years has changed into the VICTA Parent Network, which is made up of the online support group, the website, the parents' dedicated website, and a monthly workshop program where we host information, education, support sessions online with a group of parents, and we cover a variety of topics throughout the year. All of the VICTA services, we ask for parent input. It's not just my voice. We often run surveys and get input from other parents about what support they want. That's important, asking them what they want. We found that they're very good at asking what their child needs, but not very good at asking what they need. So we do have to push a little bit about what do you want to hear about. If we ever do a mental health session, they're always very keen to talk about the child's mental health, but don't really want to, address their own and the pressures and the struggles that they might be feeling. So yeah, so we moved on to podcasts because we've got busy parents who access our information and, they may not have time to read the website or attend the online workshops or go into the Facebook group and chat there. So we thought we'd make something that was really easily accessible by parents that have got a lot going on at home, and whether or not they're like out on the move, and then they can be saved and accessed at any time. And, it doesn't have to just be held. It can be held and sent out to parents who may be coming into the service as newly diagnosed children. So that's the purpose of why I'm doing the podcast today. Yeah, so I just want to touch a little bit on the importance of parent connection. I'm going to try my best to make it chronologically ordered. But when Scarlett was very little, I went to my first mother and toddler group, and that was a wonderful charity called Henshaws, which is Manchester-based, which was fabulous. It was the only thing that I could find that offered anything VI specific. I found the other baby and toddler groups a little bit difficult, obviously because Scarlett wasn't learning and moving in the same way. And I remember chatting to some mum who'd been going to that baby and toddler group for a little while now, and she was the first person to tell me about disability living allowance. I was a bit shocked, and I thought, well, if I'm going to be looking after Scarlett anyway because she's a baby, then why would she be entitled to money due to her disability? So that was a bit eye-opening, and I just think I probably would have went on for years without realising that you can apply for disability living allowance for your child. So that was kind of just the start of it, really. That group was brilliant. So many parents in there helping each other. And when my disability living allowance form was refused, which is quite normal, another parent said, well, if you go to the RNIB, they have a department there that, help you with the form, and they give me a great template, and it was worded for Scarlett, and, things like that I just would have struggled to find by myself on the internet. So just chatting to parents from that off has always been really helpful. I've got some really great parent friends. I'm not going to mention any names, but they may listen to this and be able to identify themselves. I met with one parent, an accessible therapy farm, up in York. When our children were both quite small, and I could never get Scarlett to hold on to anything to push. So we were trying to get her to walk holding trolleys because we wanted her to use that as a way to navigate round. And that therapy farm, all the animals wanted to be touched, happy to be touched. They were kind of that was their purpose, really, to be handled by children like Scarlett and patients of dementia and taken into hospitals with really poorly children. So that was like Scarlett's first experience of getting to touch a variety of different animals that she never would have had an understanding of otherwise. And I remember when I saw her hold something and push it, because she was very reluctant to hold anything. It was this massive bunny, and when I say massive, it was like about 3 loaves of bread. That's how big this bunny was. And she put it in a pram, and she had felt a bunny, put the pram in the bunny, and then pushed the bunny around the pram in the pram, and I was just like, "Oh gosh, she's that." If I wouldn't have met that parent and knew about that farm, then Scarlett wouldn't have got all this kind of understanding of animals or pushed the rabbit in the pram. I've got millions of these stories that I could tell you, but they're some of the early ones. And I think from there, I just kind of went super proactive with going to all the events hosted by all different charities, from guide dogs to Sense, just meeting all these wonderful parents along the way and connecting them with other people. Even now when I put a certain eye condition or a certain locality of a parent in the VICTA Parent Network group, can anyone help? Has anyone got any localised information? We had one last week. There was a parent up in Scotland with a newly diagnosed child, and she was struggling to engage or to find anything specific for VI children. And straight away, one of the parents who's been a friend of VICTA for a long time was like, I will speak to her, I'll contact her. So it's just like that. And whether or not that conversation is helpful, but I imagine it will be. It's just, this is what we try to do with the VICTA Parent Services, is connect people and get as much information as we can as possible across to them. So I've been talking for an awfully long time now. So I'm going to introduce our parent, another friend of VICTA, Julianne, who very kindly agreed to do this with me last minute because I thought it might be nice to get another parent on board. Julie's got a slight cough today, so she's a little bit husky. So yes, Julianne is parent to Dexter, and I'm going to pass over to you, and you can introduce yourself and do all the little bits and pieces that we've discussed.
Okay, thank you. So yes, my name's Julianne, and I am the parent of Dexter, who is 10. He has glaucoma and nystagmus. He was diagnosed at about 12 weeks and then registered as severely sight impaired at 18 months. So like Charlotte, we've got lots of stories from sort of early days. The pushing the rabbit in the pram just made me laugh because it reminded me of Dexter refusing to use a cane when he was little and going around the streets with a pink trolley. It was a trolley for putting cups and saucers on, like a little hostess trolley, bright pink, very, very loud, and going around the streets of Bletchley with his pink trolley because he would not use anything else. And we were like, well, if that's how it's going to help him get around, we were happy with that. So yeah, that's as of Dexter.
Okay, so in the early years, as you're getting your diagnosis, I know you said it was at 12 weeks, was that quite easy?
No, getting Dexter diagnosed was really difficult. So he was born at home, very fast, unplanned home delivery. He was then taken to hospital where they thought he had Down syndrome because he had quite puffy eyes. He has a single palm crease on his hands, and they thought he'd had Down syndrome. So he spent a few days in ICU because he wasn't feeding. We were then discharged saying they'll sort of get back in touch with us. By about 4 or 5 weeks, I felt he wasn't developing, and I took him to the GP. They just said, you're over anxious, don't worry about it, take him home. Then again, at 6 weeks, I took him back because he wasn't looking at me, he wasn't smiling, he wasn't doing any of those sort of early interactions. They said he's fine, sent me away again. At 12 weeks, I actually took him to A&E and I refused to leave because at this point, he hadn't actually opened his eyes 24 hours. He just stopped opening his eyes. I met with multiple doctors who just said, he's just tired. Like, he's lying in his cot, he's clearly awake, he's playing, he's wriggling around, but his eyes are closed. We were there for 24 hours before a young doctor came, and she was the first person who said to me, do you think your son can see? And at this point, I took a step back and I was like, that is exactly what I think. But I think up until then, I'd never really voiced that out loud. And although I think I knew it in the back of my head, it was something I hadn't voiced out. And it was quite hard when she first sort of said, do you think that is the problem? And after that sort of initial conversation, he was admitted into hospital and we had an optometrist come down, and that's when he was diagnosed. And he had pressures of like 45, 50. So we were there for a few days and then sent to Great Ormond Street Hospital. And that's when our surgery journey started with Dexter. He's had a very long and complicated journey with surgery after surgery. So he would have been 13 weeks when he had his first operation, and he has had 21 surgeries to date. And with each surgery, his vision has fluctuated. So he had very, very limited vision when he had his first surgery. Then he had okay vision. Then it sort of declined again. He had more surgery. It improved. So this was all to control his pressures. And then we had an incident when he would have been about 18 months old, when we were at a play session and just something with him just didn't feel right. And I went home and I said to my husband, there's something not right with him. My husband's like, he's fine. And I was like, there's something just not right. I couldn't put my finger on it. So again, I took him to the hospital, and it turned out that he'd got a detached retina, which can be a complication from some surgeries. So that was when he was then registered as severely sight impaired, because that detached retina loss led to him losing all of his sight in his right eye. So he now has no vision in his right at all. And because of the detached retina, his right eye has actually shrunk. So he's now got a micro eye, which he has a prosthetic lens that he can wear over it to make it look more like a normal eye. Dexter often declines to use his lens, but we try and encourage it where possible. His left eye, his glaucoma is still not completely controlled. His glaucoma specialist says that glaucoma is an art, and getting it right takes a lot of work. So he's on eye drops. We have regular checkups at Great Ormond Street and Moorfields. And sort of he's learnt to manage with what he's got. And some days he does better, some days he struggles more. But he's learned everything he's learnt with the vision he's got. So us, we look at him and go, how has he learnt to do that with so little vision? But for him, he knows no different. So he's learnt to walk, he's learnt to run, he's learnt to ride a motorbike, he's learnt to do all of these things, despite the fact he can only see 2 foot in front of him. But for him, that's normal. So he has just got on with it, and he just does it. It doesn't make it easy for him. It certainly doesn't make it easy for us. There's things he does that kind of give you a heart attack every day. You're like, can you just not do that? But as parents, we want him to have an active life as possible. And I never stop him doing something because he's visually impaired. Sometimes I'm tempted to stop him doing stuff because it's quite scary watching him, because he loves his motorbike. He loves going out on bike rides, and he loves running around the garden. And as parents, we see what could happen, that we can see the accidents. He doesn't see those. So when he's 2 foot away from a brick wall and you think he's going to crash, we all have a little panic. But he sees it in the last minute and he moves around it. So for him, he knows no better. He knows no different. And we try where we can to just let him.
Yeah, I think it's quite normal, isn't it, that when young visually impaired people offer advice to us parents, they do say, don't wrap us in cotton wool. And it's all well and good saying that, but then as a parent sitting back watching all these potential hazards that are going to happen. But I do think it's good that you're letting Dexter live that life and try out all these things and learn sometimes perhaps the hard way.
Yeah, I mean, to be fair, he's never really had any accidents. I think I've been at A&E more with my younger child who is sighted than I have with Dexter. They manage, they cope, they learn their way. And if we try and stop him, we're like, what about it? I'm fine. So yeah, I mean, he loves dangerous, he loves scary, he loves that adrenaline. I think that's maybe part of not having that visual stimulation. He loves roller coasters. He loves anything that's speedy and scary. We did a VICTA weekend away, and there was other children crying because they were scared of the height, and there's my child refusing to come down. He's like, no, I'm fine. He loves that craziness.
Just mentioned then that you come along to the VICTA family weekend. I think you've been to a couple, haven't you, over the years?
Yeah, we did like the early years. I remember when he was little, and we came away, and that was kind of our first.
Was that
chance.
the earlier?
Yeah, that was our first time we ever met other visually impaired children.
Yeah, I do. I remember now. So that was about 9 years ago.
He would have been, I think it would have been about 2, so 8.5 years. Yeah. We did our first weekend, and that's where us as parents met other visually impaired children. And for him as well, it was the first time he'd ever met any other VI children. And it was really nice because up until then, Dexter's like, I'm not using a cane. He thought his cane was a sword. It was a hobby horse. It was everything but an aid for walking. For him to sort of see other children using canes and other children having to hold things really close to read them, it was really good for him to witness that. And it was really good for us as parents because it can be quite isolating when you are the only parent around with a visually impaired child. And as you said earlier, like we did baby groups, we did toddler groups, and we just never fitted in. I was always on edge because Dexter didn't see other children. He would run around, and it wasn't uncommon for him to knock over another child or trip over another child. And it wasn't because he was being naughty, it was purely because he didn't see that child. But other parents would look at you in a way that then made you feel bad, and you felt yourself apologising a lot of the time for stuff that we shouldn't really be having to apologise for our child's disability. And I think because people don't see the fact that the child is blind, they're not accepting of behaviours. Which is why we like Dexter to use his cane, although he doesn't. It just helps other people see the disability, and it helps people understand some of his behaviours, but he doesn't want to use one.
Completely understand that. We do have the cane, and Scarlett does quite intensive training at her specialist school, which has got in-house mobility, which is fabulous because it's quite difficult to access from a mainstream setting. So we have that one that school are quite rigorous about her using out and about. But then we have the symbol one, and I end up just carrying the symbol one 9 times out of 10 when we're walking through a busy city centre or where there's somewhere where the pavements aren't particularly accessible. Just carry it round, and I've normally got my sunglasses on, and I'm guiding her, and everyone's looking at me thinking, why is that child guiding that woman walking down the street? So you've just spoke about the early years weekend. It's all coming back to me now. That was one of the very first early years services that we delivered many years ago. We don't do it as weekends anymore. We do it as days. So I know you've done absolutely loads as a result of being a parent of a visually impaired child. So I'd like you to tell us about, some of the projects that you've been involved in, the adventures that you probably wouldn't have gone on unless you were the parent of a visually impaired child.
Yeah, I mean, we've been on a lot of adventures. I think so when Dexter was first diagnosed as being visually impaired, we wanted books and toys that sort of represented our child, like lots of parents do. We just spent ages trying to find something like that, and we couldn't find any. We couldn't find any books with a VI child in it. We couldn't find any toys with canes. I mean, to be fair, things have come a long way because there are a lot of things available now. But 8 years ago, there was nothing, which led me and my husband, instead of sort of complaining, we decided that we would actually write our own books. So we created a bunch of books that had VI children as sort of the main characters. And it stemmed from a little doll that Dexter had that he loved, that went everywhere with him. And in a sort of a hope to get Dexter to use his cane properly, my husband made this little doll he called Scruffy, a cane. And we spent hours walking around the garden with this tiny doll that's like 15 centimetres tall, with his cane on the floor going, look, this is how you use your cane. And Dexter was still having none of it. But we sort of designed these canes, we wrote some books, and then, some other people said, oh, I really like that. Can we have a copy? And we're like, yeah, no problem. So we wrote a couple of these books. It's called Scruff of the Uffie. And then when Dexter was 5 and lockdown happened, Dexter was like, I want to write a book. Me and my husband were like, you're 5. You're not going to write a book. But he kept to his word, and all the way through lockdown, dictated to myself. He tried a little bit of touch typing, and he wrote a whole book about space. I should say Dexter is obsessed with space, and I mean obsessed. This child has built the solar system out of Play-Doh, air-dried clay, various balls. He's painted a million pictures. He's absolutely obsessed with space. So he wrote his own book called Dexter and Gracie Goes to Space. Obviously, it's based on himself. We had an artist do some of the artwork, so he would send a voice message to the artist, say what he wanted and described it. I was really impressed with Dexter when an image came back. So he uses an iPad and he zooms in so he can see images. He has to hold it about 3 inches from his working eye. So zoom in, and he was like, this isn't right. This character's got 2 eyes the same. I don't want it like that. I want it to be like me. I want it to have a small eye. So it went back to the artist, and it was brought back with a left eye being of a standard sort of eye, and then the right eye being a micro eye. He designed all what it was wearing and absolutely everything. Then he decided that Dexter in this book needed a friend called Pink, and Pink is actually based on a young lady, the very first blind child he met at the VICTA weekend. So they will know who they are. I won't use their names. So Pink was based on his little friend that he met. So he wrote this whole story, this adventure about them going off travelling, doing all the crazy things that he wanted them to do. And then for his 7th birthday, we had it published. So we had a stack of books. The stack was as tall as he was, and he was just so happy to see his actual book in print. And we do it we print it in two versions. We do like a large print size that any child can have access to. And then we do a braille version as well. So my husband brailles all the books. And then leading on from that, a little bit of bribery, still during COVID. Dexter loves baking. In order for him to bake, it was like, well, if you can touch type a recipe, we can cook. So all over COVID, it was like, it took a lot of work. Dexter's quite difficult to motivate, but he, typed 2 or 3 sentences. and the next day type 2 or 3 more. And he created his 13 favourite recipes, and that became another book of his, and that's Dexter's Baker's Dozen. We probably did about 30 or 40 things, and lots didn't work. We found a lot of recipes needed to be very particular. So we've kind of gone for recipes that don't matter. If your child can't quite measure exactly 150 ml, it doesn't matter. Dexter would do things like, I'm not doing 30 grams, I'm just doing 1 handful because that's about right. So we created that as well. And yeah, so we've got 7 or 8 books now. And then that led us on to sort of looking at lots of sensory items and sensory toys. Dexter's a very sensory orientated child. He likes to touch and feel everything. And like you said about Scarlett, he never would use knife and fork because he wanted to touch what he was eating. So he's always been very much a sensory seeker. And we'd get through a lot of toys that were not suitable. He'd like the look of it or the smell of it, but then when he touched it, he didn't like the touch, or the other way around, he'd like the touch, but then it would smell funny. To us, it might not smell at all, but for him, it would be really weird. We sort of started a sort of side onto the books is Ward's Toys. So we create these, he creates these whole sort of bundles now where you get a book, so the space book, and then he puts in lots of sensory toys linked to his space book. He does the same with the cookbook. I try and get involved. I get told to go away because apparently it's his sort of project. And all of these things we wouldn't have done without Dexter and without having to go down sort of some of these alleys that were really tricky. But actually, we've come out of it with a really good sort of sideline and something that keeps Dexter really motivated because he's not in school. Rather than being in school, he's making these amazing bundles. He does little videos about his stuff, and it's given him an amazing experience in a very different way to what he would have had if he'd have been a sighted child.
Julianne, you just touched on then about Dexter being at home full time. Education and visually impaired children can be quite a difficult area to navigate. So could you just share a bit of your personal experience with how you've got on with the local authority and educational settings?
Yeah, so when Dexter was due to start school, we chose not to put him in school because he was an August baby, and we just felt because of all the time in hospital and all the surgeries, we just weren't ready for him to go to school, and we didn't feel he was ready to go to school. So we chose to defer him. So we thought, we're going to keep him out for the first year, then we will look at schools for the second. The second year came round and he did so well, we thought, we're just going to keep him for another year and keep up the homeschooling. Then COVID hit, so everybody was homeschooling. Now for us, we had quite an easy time during COVID because we were already homeschooling. It wasn't a big deal for us. And we didn't have that big transition. And Dex didn't have that big transition because he was just used to being at home. So we continued homeschooling. When we came out of COVID, we were sort of like, maybe we need to start looking at getting Dexter into an education setting, meet new people and things like that, and to come away from mummy because he's very attached to me. I've been with him, 24/7. So he was used to it just being mummy. So we felt, he needed to broaden his sort of understanding of the world. So we started looking at schools. We went to a few and we had a few issues with Dexter kind of tripping over things, walking into stuff. And we weren't convinced that a mainstream school was going to be, or a big mainstream school would be the right place for him. So we started looking at others. And while we were doing this, we also applied for an EHCP for Dexter. So for those that aren't aware, that's an educational healthcare plan. That was granted quite quickly. Now, I know a lot of people have a lot of difficulty getting an educational healthcare plan for their child. But we were lucky, we got it quite quickly. But because we applied for an EHCP, that put him on the radar a little bit more within the educational team and the local authority. At this point, they hadn't actually realised that Dexter wasn't in a school setting. So he had just got lost in the system somehow, and they had just assumed that he was in school. So when they agreed the EHCP, we got a phone call from the local authority saying, we're just ringing up to, for your term leave review, see how things are going. And I was like, what do you mean the term leave review? We've never had a phone call before. They kind of were a little bit like trying to make it sound like they'd been in contact all along. So we had a meeting with them and we had somebody come out. And they met with Dexter. And Dexter was also diagnosed as autistic and having ADHD. So when they came out and they did their sort of the year review, there was lots of and ahhing about school for him. Nobody would say there isn't a school that could meet his needs because they're not allowed to. But there was also a lot of where could he go? So we ended up just homeschooling for longer and longer and longer. And then it was only last year, so Dexter was 8.5, when the local authority actually admitted that they could not meet Dexter's needs in a school setting. Because he's ultra smart, he didn't fit into a special needs school. Because in Milton Keynes this is, I mean other areas are different, but in Milton Keynes the SEND schools here don't have a very high academic level, and Dexter has. So all of the SEND schools declined to take him because they felt they could not meet need. All the mainstream schools declined, feeling that they could not meet his behavioural needs because of his autism. He really struggles on how to behave appropriately within a group setting. He struggles with cues and facial expressions, as lots of VI children do. You know, if you can't see someone's facial expression, then you're not going to know that that person's cross or sad. You know, make blunders. Because of his hyperactivity, he does lots of jumping, lots of spinning, and they felt that wasn't safe in a mainstream setting. So they also declined to take him. I just want to go back there a minute. So when we went for Dexter's autism diagnosis, we had a lot of difficulty getting a diagnosis. It took 4 years from referral to diagnosis. And one of the main reasons we had was that all of the behaviours that Dexter does, everybody was blaming on his visual impairment. So I think for parents, if you feel that your child has another disability on top of their visual impairment, do push for it. Because for years we were just told he spins because he's sensory seeking, because he's visually impaired. He jumps and lands like very, very heavily on his feet. And we were told it's just because he's looking for the sensory return from the... And it isn't. When we eventually did see somebody for his ASD assessment, they were very much like, this is ASD behaviour. It's his way of controlling his own behaviours. He does lots of flapping. So, you know, I felt there was something else, but it took a long time to get other professionals to agree with that. Once we got that diagnosis, it was a lot easier for us and for other people involved because up until then it was just like he's visually impaired, all of his EHCP, all of his support was around his visual impairment, which is brilliant, absolutely brilliant. But we also needed more. So we got the diagnosis of autism and ADHD. Once the local authority did actually admit that they couldn't school him, they then agreed that we could have something, a YOTAS package. Again, lots of people may not know that this is an option. So it stands for Education Other Than School or College. So what that means is the local authority have a legal responsibility to educate your child. So that can be either in an alternative provision or through a home education base. So for us, they now provide a maths teacher and an English teacher and a science teacher. So where before, mum and dad were the teachers and the carers and everything else, which made it quite difficult because I've passed on the bug already. There was a difficulty for us sometimes about where that line was between, school day and home. So now they provide that. And we've got a really good VI team that have been able to educate the tutors around the visual impairment, have been able to say to them, these are the things as a VI child he needs, so adaptive reading material, about having sensory breaks, eye breaks, all of those sorts of things. So they've been really good. And now we've got a great group of teachers who he loves. I can be more mummy rather than the maths teacher, And to be fair, actually, particularly with his science, I actually now think he's smarter than I am. So I'm happy to take that step back and give him to somebody else. And I think now he's in a better place. I don't think school would have been the right place for him. But I think, if you are there and you have got a child who you do not feel is doing well in school and you think it is affecting their mental health, then there are other avenues out there. The local authority don't always like to let you know because it's a cost, but it is there and it is worth fighting for. And if you feel your child needs more support, then do it. Because I still think if I hadn't have pushed the hospital when he was 12 weeks old, our outcome could have been a lot worse, because I think they would have just kept sending me home. And same with the ASD assessment, same with the ADHD. You know, it was only us or me pushing that we got to where we are today. So if you feel that your child needs it, then keep going. You will get there in the end. Yes, it may take 4 years, but you will.
What would you say has been your biggest struggle as a parent? Not Dexter's biggest struggle, your biggest struggle.
I think my biggest struggle has been isolation. So when Dexter was very little, I had a big circle of friends and we all got on very, very well. But because as he got older and his behaviours became a little bit more difficult to manage, we don't see any of those people anymore because they struggled with his behaviour towards their children. They didn't like it. They didn't like the fact he was jumping or he was running around or he was knocking over their child maybe. They couldn't understand his behaviours. And then what would happen was, because I would feel bad about the way he behaved, we would stop doing things. So, for years we didn't go to groups, and because he wasn't in school, and it's kind of now at the point he's 10, it's very, very hard as parents to actually meet people who understand us and understand him. And I think it's impact as well because of the ASD and the ADHD, but there's actually very few places I can take him. The VICTA weekend that we did in July, I think it was, that is the first time in years, and I mean years, that I've actually been able to leave Dexter with people and not have to worry. Because everywhere else, you don't get 10 minutes peace before he's doing something he shouldn't be doing or he wants some input. So you're constantly with him, talking to him, navigating around things for him. It's very hard to go. You can't go to normal gym sessions. You can't go to activity centres because people just don't take him. I mean, I've tried so much stuff and it's either like, you've got to stay with him because our risk assessment says he's not safe on his own, or it's ridiculously expensive because you have to pay for him and then you have to pay for somebody else as a one-to-one. So I think that's been our hardest thing. We've lost pretty much all of our friends that we had prior because of his behaviours. And obviously some of that is impacted because he's got autism and ADHD. It's not all linked to his VI, but it has a big impact. And things like, you can't just go and do normal activities. You have to think so much more about, is it going to be accessible? Is he going to get overstimulated? He finds things very loud. So, is it going to be too loud for him? Is it going to be too busy for him? Is he going to get knocked over? If you go to places, he loves theme parks, but we can only go to the theme park in term time when all the other children are at school because it's too busy at weekends. He can't wait in the queue. He gets tripped over in just the craziness of it all. Excuse me. I remember shopping with him in Aldi and I've got a trolley, I've got Dexter with his cane, and at that point we had a therapy dog. And despite all of those things, people still were walking into Dexter. He still got knocked in the head by a man in a basket. And there's just lack of awareness makes it very, very difficult that even the simple day-to-day tasks, taking a blind child out is really hard. And especially one that doesn't want to keep their cane tip on the floor and wants to use it as a sword or a mace. And also, I think their bluntness as well. I don't know if you've experienced this, but because he won't see something, but he will smell it and he'll be like, that really smells, or other inappropriate comments. So he'll hear something like that person's just farted really loudly, or the embarrassment at times that he comes out with. I'm just like, just swallow me up. But he thinks that that's fine and that's okay. And then you get these looks from people and you're like, I'm really sorry.
I completely understand that. Not so much taking Scarlett out. She's a flapper, she's a singer, she can shout when she gets a little bit overwhelmed. She rocks back into, she's not very obviously blind, she's very obviously presents with disabilities, and I'm kind of very thick-skinned with it now. Everyone can just stare away. But what I found is the children have got older, because there's only 368 days between Scarlett and her younger brother. Now he's a 14-year-old boy. Whenever I suggest us all doing something that involves all three of us, he's reluctant because he's not. I was very much like, you've just got to learn to have this thick skin. It's none of our business what people are looking at or saying. But I've had to kind of soften on that now. As a single parent who doesn't have a second person, Sonny's got to the age where he can be left on his own, and Scarlett's probably at the age now where she can be left with Sonny for a little while. She's no bother at home. But yeah, that kind of us all being a family unit and all going out for a meal together. Sonny loves eating out. The minute that Scarlett goes to respite, he's like, restaurant. And I never realised that he didn't want to go with Scarlett because she's because she's quite vocal and because she's very reluctant to use knife and fork. So we do always get dry food so she can use her hand, because it's a big ask for her to eat in a busy environment anyway, without saying, oh, you've got to take your special spoon and your special bowl and do. So yeah, I think Scarlett is not at the level of understanding where she knows she's blind or different, and she doesn't verbalise in that way. It's kind of the impact that it's had on a teenage boy who's very self-conscious and going through that phase where he thinks like everyone's kind of looking over, and him dealing with that. I think I found that quite difficult. When they were babies, I'd just take them and chuck them on the trampoline and leave them to their own devices. But now it's like I'm living like a double life, one where we go to posh restaurants and the cinema, and the other one where we still go to play centres with loads of tiny babies and I run around after her. So yeah, we've stopped feeling like that, all three of us against the world type vibe. It is very much like sort that one out, and then the minute the other one goes to respite, is sort that one out, and I'm kind of a little bit torn. Well, I'm just never I'm never a person. I'm just either a mum that day or a mum that day or a mum that day. But this is a different type, a mum to a teenager.
It's definitely harder as they get older. I think when they're younger, the difference isn't so big. I think as they get older, it becomes more and more apparent, the difference between your child and a mainstream child. And I think it's just really important to try not to let that get you down, and not to look at that someone else's child and go, well, they can do this, that and the other and mine can't. Because I think it can be really, it can be really depressing in a way to think of all the things your child can't do, you know, when you compare them to other people. And I think it's really important to look at the positives of the things you can do. I mean, my child's written 2 books. You know, okay, he can't tie shoelaces. His 5-year-old brother ties his shoelaces for him. He can but won't. Doesn't want to do his coat up. His 5-year-old, brother will do it for him. But he can tell you, you know, the chemical components of fireworks and what colour they make. He can tell you things about black holes that you probably don't really want to know. So I think it's trying to keep hold of the positives and the things that they can do. And he wouldn't know that, I don't think, if he didn't have autism and he wasn't vision impaired. He would be playing Pokemon and running around the streets doing other things. Mm-hmm. So I think it's really important to look at the positives and look at the things they can do, and try not to get wrapped up in the, I wish he could do this, I wish he could do that. But yeah, it is, as you say, going out as a family. I've got a 5-year-old who is a little bit on the hyperactive side, I think everybody would say, and then a 10-year-old VI child, and it is hard. Where do you take that meets both needs? Yeah, I'm not looking forward to teenage years, I have to say. I don't want the whole hormonal teenage drop as well.
Yeah, it is quite difficult when people do say to me, when they're little, you can get away with kind of behaviours because everyone goes, oh, they're just so cute.
Yeah.
But now Scarlett's like a full-sized woman. All this stuff is a little bit more, you know, a lot more staring and looking over at what's going on. But when people say, oh, it must be so hard, which they do say frequently, and I know that they mean well when they do say it, but to be honest, I think the sighted 14-year-old and all this hormonal strop thing that's going on at the minute is far more difficult to deal with than kind of Scarlett being a little bit noisy in places when she's overwhelmed. And I always think, oh, thank God that she's not having to get her heart broken. When my son is going through this like on a weekly basis with different girls, it seems like, or she's not bothered about super expensive clothing items. She's quite happy with a biscuit and the same Alexa she's had for the last 5 years. So, you know, Scarlett is super easy to look after. It's just quite difficult taking them both out together, really. We have some fluctuations in her sleep. And we'll be doing a podcast on...
What's sleep?
We'll be doing a podcast on sleep, but like sometimes you don't even know you've got Scarlett, because when she gets in from school, she's been so committed to learning and the demands that the setting's placed on her. When she gets in, she's very much right, leave me alone, I just want my room and my Alexa and to regulate myself.
I have to say, Alexas they've got to be on the top of any VI child's list. They are fantastic. Dexter absolutely loves his, absolutely loves it. Although I'm not keen on it at 4 o'clock in the morning, but he loves it, and it's given him a level of independence, actually, that a lot of things don't. Because instead of asking me 1,001 questions, he goes and asks Alexa. And educationally, they're brilliant as well.
Yeah.
But they do keep them out of mischief at times. As you say, they can request their music, they can get so much knowledge from it. Absolutely brilliant. I love mine. I can't wait for him to get old enough to use their glasses as well.
Yeah, I find with the Alexa, with Scarlett, it was always another song, a different song. Thankfully, we've got headphones now, which means she can skip through the phones and find the ones that she wants independently. But she was always bringing the phone to me, saying, help, help, different. And you go through until she found the one that she wanted. So, yeah, Alexa's a a brilliant bit of kit, whether or not you're asking them like quite scary facts about black holes or you're asking them to change the song up.
The thing he asks are crazy. They really are. But, you know, it helps him. It helps him a lot. And even if it's just simple things like what's the time? Or, you know, set me 10-minute timers. Lots of those sort of practical things that they're really good for. It's, you know, same with certain electronic devices that allow children to zoom in and look at stuff. There's a lot more out there. When I look about, like, when Dexter was little and I said I couldn't get a doll with a cane. You know, there are now dolls with canes, and 3D printers are becoming fantastic for sort of printing that sort of stuff. I mean, we've got little dolls that have got hearing aids and canes as well. So I think there's a lot more now than there was. I think things have progressed. And I think as more and more people sort of speak out for children with disabilities, I think we will see more and more, which is fantastic. So hopefully, sort of the young children coming in now will have it a lot easier in that respect. And certainly, you know, technology-wise. Although that has to be a downside of having a VI child, is our children are going to be very much all about the technology.
Yeah.
I hate it. I'm sorry. You know, I live in a cave. I hate computers. I hate all of this technical stuff. And when your 10-year-old's getting better than you, it is slightly concerning. But, you know, they are of an age where that is what...
That is, yeah.
In order to access everything, that's what they need. And it's brilliant for them.
Yeah, no, agreed. Yeah, I think that brings us to the end. I want to say thank you very much for coming and chatting with me today. It's been nice getting an update on Dexter as well. So, yeah, fabulous. Thank you, Julianne. And hopefully catch up again soon.
No problem. Thank you.
This podcast is brought to you by VICTA, a national charity empowering children and young adults who are blind or partially sighted.